87% of clothing ends up in landfill. One merch t-shirt uses 2,700 litres of water in the production of it.
It's definitely a huge problem for the music industry.
We're creating this zero waste network where artists can access fully sustainable merch. The way that we do it works out cheaper than even like the cheapest kind of fast fashion options. For smaller bands, it turns like a tour that they're going to lose a lot of money on into something that they can like break even, which is massive. Growing it quite exponentially this year. Very ambitious, I will admit, but the kind of dream is to
Hello and welcome back to Sound Advice. I'm joined this week by James Gillespie of the Again Network. How are you, James?
I'm very good, thanks.
It's really good to have you on the show. So you run Again, which is a environmentally focused merchandise company. So can you just tell us a bit more about what that is?
Yeah, sure. Again, takes secondhand clothes, which we collect through donations and thrifting at charity shops, and through screen printing. We put designs onto those t-shirts predominantly, and turn them into artist merch. So the idea behind it is that we're creating this zero waste network where artists can access like fully sustainable merch, but because it's through donations and thrifting, it's works out cheaper than even like the cheapest kind of fast fashion options on the market for merch.
Yeah. What made you so passionate about the sort of environmental side of merch in the first place?
I think that even before I started working in music, I have always been really passionate about the environment and, read a lot about all of the kind of like horrible things that are happening in the world. So that kind of is where the idea is rooted in. But specifically with artist merch, the idea comes from having worked at a music venue for quite a while and worked with emerging artists in the Merseyside area, and recognising how important merch can be for artists when they're starting out, and really it's the biggest revenue stream that they can have when they're doing shows. So recognizing how important that is, but how in essence the sustainable options that are on the market from companies like Gildan, like the big ones, are like they just prices out smaller artists. So most of those artists are kind of forced to use the not sustainable options, which obviously has a massive impact when you think about how many artists there are and how many of them use merch as a tool to make money, which that's one side of it, like the impact environmentally of that and trying to see whether there's solutions to it, but also the fact that the idea as a byproduct of it being secondhand clothes results in the merch being cheaper for artists, so they can the profit margins that they have with our merch is greater than the profit margins with other merch, and it also allows them to pass that kind of saving on to the fans that are buying the t-shirts. So it came from an idea that, you know, we've not like invented the idea of thrifting t-shirts and putting designs on them, you know, like bands do that all the time, but it was the idea more where there's a network around it where I can do the work in terms of like finding those t-shirts and printing on them, and
Got a siren, so I suppose you can hear that.
yeah, and that allows it to be a lot more accessible for artists. It's the same as going online and buying some from a website. It's the same kind of principle. They don't have to do any work towards it. They can just see the t-shirts arrive. So it kind of improves the access to that idea of thrifting and using secondhand over buying new.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the great things about it, is that it's just a win-win for everyone who's involved, because the artists can make more money from their merch, which is obviously so important, and it's way better for the environment, and it sort of creates this sort of network and ecosystem that you've been talking about. I mean, I think I'm sure people have heard about like some of the problems with like fast fashion and like know a bit about it, but since I'm guessing you probably know a bit more about it, what are sort of the key issues with sort of fashion and merch in terms of sustainability?
So the two facts that I always say is that one standard merch t-shirt uses 2,700 liters of water in the production of it, and those pieces of clothing are predominantly made in the global south, where water scarcity is a massive thing. And the other statistic is that 87% of clothing ends up in landfill. So the idea with those two kind of facts is that firstly we're through this idea, we're kind of like eliminating that production of t-shirts in the first place. But on the other side of it, the use of getting it through donations is stopping some of those clothes from going to landfill. It's continuing the life cycle of those clothes. And like kind of outside of that, in terms of fast fashion, like I was saying, the kind of the life of those t-shirts or whatever comes from predominantly in the global south, where people are not paid anywhere near enough to kind of live fulfilling lives, and kind of we in the kind of privileged areas of the world kind of benefit from that every time that we buy something new. So that's kind of the roots of it. It's one of the biggest polluting industries in the world, and I think kind of ideas like this and kind of thinking differently as well. It's not about every artist coming to me and using again. It's about like changing the idea of how we should do things and kind of like facilitating that.
Yeah, I mean, so I was doing some research and I had the 87% of all textiles go to the dump each year fact that you mentioned, but I also had that fashion production makes up 10% of humanity's carbon emissions, which I think was definitely a lot more than I thought.
Yeah,
that's why I was looking into it.
No, it's mad, and I think it really kind of needs addressing as one of like the big things that we need to change in our lifestyles, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a huge problem for the music industry specifically as well, because, I mean, you were touching on it before, but artists really do rely on merch in this day and age, especially with sort of lack of income from streaming and a lot of venues closing down, so there being less gig opportunities. It's something that artists are relying on more and more to like make that income and fund their projects, right?
Totally. I think it is the most important part of building a career from the ground up, especially if you don't have much investment from other ways, if you don't have much money, like a lot of artists don't, especially like in the north. And it kind of, I've like worked as a merch seller at different places and like driven bands round, and it's kind of, you can see how much of a difference it makes. Like it really turns for smaller bands, it turns like a tour that they're going to lose a lot of money on into something that they can like break even, which is massive, and it lets them do it again, and ultimately that leads to them being able to have a viable career and keep it going.
Yeah, I mean, I was speaking the other week actually with Zara Smile, who you've worked with on merch, and we were talking about how a lot of artists sort of have sort of merch anxiety to sort of get started selling something. Why do you think that is, and sort of what would you say to those artists?
I think one thing could be how it is a lot of money starting out, and it becomes less money per t-shirt the more you buy. So it kind of, the way if you're an artist looking to get merch, you kind of stuck between a position of getting like a small amount because you don't think you're going to sell that many, versus getting loads so you can save a bit of money, but you might have like boxes full of merch for years that you can't shift. So that might be a side of it. So like the kind of money element of it, and not being able to kind of invest and make the money off it, is definitely a side I could see.
Yeah, I mean, I think the way I see it is that, yeah, as you said, you sort of have these two choices between sort of expensive items that you can get a small amount of, in which case people think there's not much point because you're not going to make that much out of it, or you have to sort of invest and get like 100 t-shirts when you think you could sell 20, and then you're a bit scared to sort of get going almost.
Yeah, and it's tough when if you've got like you've only got gigs in the place that the area that you live, and it's kind of like it depends on a lot of parameters whether you're gonna get that many gigs, and like might not be that many people come into the gig, and so it's a risk. It's the same as kind of any business. You're putting money into it, but there's a risk that you won't get a return. I think with the way that we do it, because it's kind of like a flat rate relatively, you could buy like 10 t-shirts and it would be very reasonable, and you can, if you're doing a gig, you can more or less guarantee that if the merch looks really nice and you've got someone selling it and there's like a lot of people there's a good chance you will sell that many. So you can kind of like, there's less risk involved when the price, if you get it from us, when the price is quite low.
Yeah, I mean that's exactly pretty much what Zara was saying, was that by working with you, she was able to sort of buy a small quantity that she felt comfortable that she could sell, and then I think maybe sort of undersold herself a bit because she sold those out and then bought another batch, from what I was hearing.
Yeah, and that's also the magic of it, because you don't have to. You can buy a couple and see how it goes, and then just come back and the next gig just buy some more, and it's a bit more kind of, you've got the kind of safety net of not having to buy loads, and you can kind of experiment with it and see where certain gigs, like, you might sell a few, at other gigs you might sell quite a lot, but you can kind of like always be in this position where you're not kind of like risking a load of money on the basis that on the kind of like gamble that you might sell them.
Yeah, I mean, and the other factor I suppose is that when people do have to buy sort of from a sort of more generic sort of printing brand where they get sort of, I don't know, 100 t-shirts in and they can't sell them, there's an even more sort of environmental aspect to that, because they either store them in their house, which probably becomes a nightmare, or they end up binning them or getting rid of them, and that's just creating even more bad impact.
Yeah, so it's exactly the kind of like it's not just a financial risk that those t-shirts could end up like anywhere if you haven't shifted them in a certain amount of time, and that obviously has an environmental impact. So yeah, kind of it allows people to be a bit more mindful about like how much they get in, and kind of think of it in that way, where it's like, I'm not going to get 200 t-shirts now because I'm not necessarily going to sell them all. Yeah.
So you do this via screen printing. So for anyone who doesn't know, what sort of is screen printing, and how do you use it to create this zero waste merch?
So screen printing is not something I'm natural at, and I learned to do it off the back of kind of thinking about this project. And what essentially is you have a screen, and it's kind of like a mesh screen, so paint can go through the screen, and what you do is you cover it in emulsion, and then you heat set the design onto the emulsion. So once the emulsion's dried, you can put the screen out in the sun if it's sunny, or using a UV lamp, and you put this kind of transparency paper on, and it has the design on it. And once it's been heat set, you can wash off the emulsion that the design was covered by. So then you have a screen where the mesh is only where the design is, so the paint goes through. So you've got like a kind of like printing press thing. You put the screen down, and you kind of like, with this squeegee thing, push the kind of paint into the t-shirts. I was very lucky. I got funding last July to kind of like get all that equipment to start off with, and that kind of is the basis of it. That's how we kind of produce the t-shirts.
Yeah, and I mean, I read in you did a feature with Boot Music magazine, who was in that very chair before, and I was reading that it mentioned that you sort of specifically go for like ethically sourced shirts and stuff. And I just wonder what do you mean by that, by ethically sourced?
Well, what we mean by that is that the t-shirts could form, the tag on the t-shirt could be from Primark or like H&M or any of the fast fashion brands, but the point is that they're second hand, so it's not a case of the t-shirts weren't necessarily ethically sourced from the start. They were part of like the fast fashion kind of industry, but because we're taking them from donations and from charity shops, they're second hand, so we're upcycling them essentially. So rather than them going to landfill, they're being turned into something else. So in terms of like ethically sourced, the idea is that it's zero waste. We're not relying on any kind of like. It's also not like dead stock as well, which is like kind of another side of what that industry is, which is quite a confusing thing, because you think that dead stock means that those companies, it's not quite right, there's something wrong with the t-shirt somewhere, so they're not going to sell it on their shop floor, but it's still part of that industry, I'd say. So it's like it's better definitely than because it would end up in landfill in the say eventually if it wasn't dead stock, but it's kind of like funding that industry in a way, so it's got kind of like, it's a bit of a more complicated thing, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but we wouldn't do that. It's just, it's like completely second hand, someone's bought it, it's had a life, and it's that person has like decided that they want to donate it somewhere, so that's it, continuing the cycle of the t-shirt.
Yeah, I think it's really good actually, that I think it would be very easy to like almost be on your high horse a little bit about not wanting to print on like a Primark t-shirt or an H&M t-shirt because it's from that fast fashion industry, but ultimately that would just lead to more items in landfill and more things being unused.
Yeah, definitely. And the way we've kind of thought about subverting that in a way is we've got a stamp that we put on over the top of where the kind of design is on the inside of the shirt, like on the back there. If you say Primark, we put a stamp saying again, it says like repurposed by Again. So the idea is that obviously if a fan is at a merch stand and it says on the like sheet of paper and the person's explaining that it's all secondhand, it still has the label on it, which is kind of like makes it look like you've just gone to Primark and bought a t-shirt for cheap straight from there and printing something on it. But because we've got this stamp that kind of brands it as something else, it's been transformed from something that's had a life into something else. That's kind of like a way to be a bit more clear about what the idea is.
Yeah, and I mean it's got a different quality altogether to like. I think people might be thinking about like iron-on t-shirts and stuff like that. But I've got one at home. It's in the wash, so I would have worn it today. But it's got a very different like quality to that when you print them with the screen printing, right?
Yeah, definitely. It's the same as like any kind of professional t-shirts, any kind of merch t-shirts that you see are often screen printed. So the that kind of like way of applying the design, I think this is probably screen printed as well. Like it's really kind of high quality. It's fine, and that kind of, in terms of the way the merch looks, it looks professional. And another side of it is obviously a lot of the time when with merch, it's often only a couple of colours, if not maybe like one colour as an option. The t-shirts are, but because our t-shirts are from donations, they're all completely like unique t-shirts, essentially, which means that I've worked with bands and sold the Again merch at the merch desk and seen like people come up, and it's really interesting because there's a whole range of t-shirts. They're all different sizes, they're all different colours, they might have like stripes on them, and it's quite an interesting way to do it. I think it's, especially when I've worked on gigs where all of the bands are selling merch, it feels like even though the band I'm working with might not be the headliner, people are always coming to our merch desk first because it just looks quite interesting.
Yeah, because I suppose if if there's a load of different merch tables and everyone else has probably realistically a white t-shirt with a black design in the middle, and you've got just something like I was looking at when I was researching the episode for Zara, I was looking at her merch and she had this like picture of a stack and every single one's like a different color or like long sleeve and short sleeve, so it just gives like as I was saying about how much it's a win-win, like it just gives the customer so many more options as well.
Yeah, totally. And I think it's it makes it quite interesting, and I think it makes it like a bit more accessible about choosing what t-shirt you want as well, because when you've got just a line of merch that's small, medium, large, or extra large, I find with merch that like I really don't like how merch fits. I'm really I like normal standard merch. I always think that if I get a medium, it's really tight, but if I get a large, it's like down to here. And I always really annoys me because I like want to buy the merch.
Well, I think often it's because it's often like the cheapest t-shirt they can source, right? That's the problem.
Yeah, no, yeah. But yeah, that's it. And also you don't have like the option. It's not like with ours, there could be like 4 medium shirts that are there, but because they're all different, they're kind of like different dimensions. So there might be like, they might be a bit shorter or a bit longer, and it kind of you can like see how that makes it a bit more interesting, and like they kind of fit on people better, I think.
Yeah, no, definitely. So, how long have you been doing again now?
I started it in May last year, and I went down with the band Trout to Great Escape in Brighton, and we had the idea. It was me and Chaz from Trout kind of like cooked this idea up about taking secondhand clothes down, and I didn't have the screen printer then, so it was with a fabric pen. It was very DIY. It was just like a design that Chaz drew on the t-shirts. And that was kind of, we put that together quite quickly because we only had the idea a few weeks before Great Escape, but I thought it was a really good way to like launch it as an idea and kind of promote it to like people that I'm very, very far from in kind of like music circles. So that went really well. And then, like I was saying, in June, July, I got some funding from PRS, and that kind of led to being able to get screen printing equipment and being able to do high quality designs that a lot of bands are going to be like wanting to get. So it kind of like went from there. Got the screen printer. I've done it for a few bands, and now at the moment, kind of like looking towards growing it quite exponentially this year.
Yeah, well, I was about to come on to that actually. That you've just a couple of days actually ago since we recorded this, it was announced that you got some funding from Youth Music Next Gen funds. So like, what are the plans with that? What are sort of the plans for the future of Again?
So that I put funding, I put an application in for that, essentially to work on the project a day a week for 6 months. Among other things, there's a few other pieces of equipment that I need and stuff like that. But the main thing is working on the project. I think the biggest challenge for me has been having to work full time to, like live and pay rent and all of that kind of stuff, and then doing the project in my free time and like in evenings and like in a very kind of like casual ad hoc way. Whereas now with this funding, it means that I can pay myself a wage, like a day's wage every week, to sit down and work for a day, like thinking about like strategizing and working out how best to increase like the donations that are coming in, and looking forward to increasing the like how the kind of production capacity that I can handle, and then looking beyond that, hoping to find ways to promote it in different cities around the UK, and the kind of like very ambitious, I will admit, but the kind of dream is to be in a situation in however long where there's a lot of cities that are kind of using the same process, not necessarily getting it off me. That would be impossible. I don't have the time to kind of like facilitate that, but working out ways in which there could be other people in different cities that are doing it, and kind of growing that so it has kind of an impactful effect on like the whole industry.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the donations. That's getting donations of like secondhand clothing and stuff. That's quite a big part of what you do to run the operation, right?
Yeah. So it's the way that I have done it in the past is through clothes swaps, and that can be quite effective because obviously people, it's just a kind of like low. In my experience, clothes swaps are really popular. Like, you know, as soon as people hear about them, they like dropping off bin bags full of clothes, and just like picking through them and finding the ones that are suitable for turning into like merch. But the way that moving forward, I think I want to do it is kind of a similar situation to how charity shops would do it, which is having drop-off points in different spaces around Merseyside, where people can drop off their clothes. So when I leave here today, I'm going to go back, and I've got these apple crates that I'm going to paint white and put the design on, and I'm going to put them in Future Yard and a few other places around Merseyside, and kind of see how that works, where people come in and see what that is, and maybe like they're not going to obviously first time, but like once they've seen it, they might think, oh, next time I'm here, I've got a few like bits that I can drop off. So that's the way that I'm hoping will kind of increase capacity for t-shirts, because in the past it's been quite a challenge getting, you know, like people come to me with like orders, and sometimes I just like don't have enough t-shirts to provide, so that's where the thrifting comes in. I live in Birkenhead, so the charity shops there is so cheap to buy t-shirts from charity shops, literally like £1 or £2. So that kind of side of it is also a kind of valid way to do it. But moving forward, I want to target donations more, because ultimately, even if it is £1 or £2 per t-shirt, I want it to be as kind of viable as possible, and make sure that it's working as well as possible, and the artists are getting the best kind of like deal possible. So yeah, that's the kind of idea moving forward.
Yeah. You mentioned sort of getting out of Merseyside in the future and sort of expanding it to different cities. Is like different merch items as well something that you're maybe looking at? I think it's t-shirt based at the moment, isn't it?
It is t-shirt based at the moment. I think there's definitely something to be said about tote bags. But I think the way that could work is actually sewing like tote bags out of like old bed sheets and stuff. Because I've found that definitely there's places that there's a lot of places that you can get reclaimed like sheets from, like at hospitals and stuff like that. They often they give away all of the stuff that they can't use anymore, and it's just this perfectly fine stuff. So that's a way for tote bags to be produced. I think that's like definitely potential next step. Outside of that, I've not thought about it a lot. There has been times where, you know, there's also do jumpers and hoodies, like that's another kind of like, if those come in as donations, I'll offer them to the bands that are ordering as like a, you know, if they're interested, they can have like a hoodie and a jumper. So it depends what donations come in. But I think in terms of what the idea is, the t-shirts are like, that's the predominant kind of like mode of merch. So that's like the main priority is that, but definitely open to other ways we could do it.
Well, I mean, I think that's a good place to wrap up. But I was just going to say that, like I was saying before, it's such a win-win, because the artists, for the fans themselves who are like environmentally conscious, and for you. And I think it's sort of, this is an idea that's sort of hitting culture like at the right moment, where people are sort of ready to people are really at a point of saturation with fast fashion, I think, where people are sort of sick of the environmental impact that it's causing and wanting to make a change. So congratulations on how good it is, and looking forward to seeing more from it.
Thank you. Nice one.
Thanks for coming on as well.
Yeah, cheers. Thanks for having me.